Thanks everybody for joining us. Today we have Andrew Peel, myself, Kelly Fisher, and our guest, Benjamin Gregory. Ben is the team lead architect and senior associate at WalterFedy, who we have supported with Passive House training. Today we're going to be learning more about who WalterFedy are and their journey to Passive House. So welcome, Ben, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to start with some just light questions, some icebreakers to get everybody warmed up, a bit happy. Maybe you'll tell us a few things you don't want to, but we'll get going. So I guess the first one that we kind of wanted to use as an icebreaker, I guess, is what is your favorite Flintstone vitamin?
Oh man, have to go back. That's like 25 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
I'd have to say purple, if anything.
purple.
Yeah,
Oh, like the grape cough syrup or something.
yeah. It's been a while, but I think that was good.
I found all the purple stuff, like the chewable Tylenols used to taste like the Flintstones for a while. If you ever had the chewable purple Tylenols when you were a kid, oh, those are so good. It's like candy.
Long time ago.
Okay, I digress. Yeah, very long time ago. So maybe we'll start out with a bit more of an introduction. So maybe you can tell us a bit about what you do at WalterFedy.
Sure. So I'm what's called a project architect. So that typically means I'm working directly with the owner as the prime consultant. And depending on the project, it involves coordinating the work of other consultants to deliver the project. Typically responsible for overseeing all aspects of the project from design through approvals and into construction. Specifically at Walter Fady, I'm in the ICR sector. So our company is broken up into various sectors. So we've got a healthcare team, we have an industrial team, an education team, and ICR is sort of a catch-all. It stands for institutional, commercial, and residential. It just means we kind of take all the leftovers. But residential and mixed use is a big part of our business. So that's typically what I'm involved in.
That sounds exciting. Very wide department though. Institutional, commercial, residential. That's like all encompassing.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess when you say you're a project architect, I guess has your passion for architecture come from?
I think architecture is really sort of a calling. It's a mixture of art, science, business. For me, kind of growing up, I always loved the arts. I loved history and math. Architecture sort of just fell in my lap. My mom will probably tell you my architectural career started when I was about 5 years old. I drew a beautiful portrait of a house and whole scenery on the wall in crayon. She was super happy about that.
I bet.
But yeah, it's really something that's developed over time. So I had a lot of related classes in high school, and I went into university and never really looked back. I've always kind of fell in love with it. And the more and more I learned about architecture, the more and more I love. We spend so much time of our lives inside of buildings. We celebrate some of our greatest life moments inside of buildings. We eat, sleep, and breathe inside of buildings for the most part. So I've always been passionate about how we can improve the indoor quality of spaces and how we can improve our interaction with buildings.
That's a lot of passion. Yeah. It's great to hear. The indoor space is something that is a really a keen focus I find, making sure that everybody's comfortable. We do spend an alarming amount of time inside, more than you realize.
Yeah, and the other side of it too is that I've always been fascinated, and you learn in architectural school a lot about what's typically referred to as like period architecture, and that's architecture over the course of human history at different time phrases. And in those different period pieces, you have kind of buildings being limited by the labor force and access to building materials at the time and place. I think what we're seeing right now and what's kind of gives me a lot of passion is that we're not restricted by that anymore. In our modern construction environment, we've got so much accessibility with technology. We're now digital, we're 3D modeling everything, everything's computed. The possibilities are really endless. And we can really push the level of design and the different type of building we can deliver.
That's really awesome. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Um, so everybody generally has a bit of a hero to get to where they are, or some sort of hero's journey, or a story that really helps define, who they are as a person or their characteristics or what really drives them and gives them passion in their work. So would you be able to maybe share some of your biggest challenges that you would have ever overcome to get to the position you are today?
I think if you ask any architect, they'll probably have a similar answer. I think The journey itself is definitely challenging to get to the point where you are a licensed architect. I don't know if you want me to get into the whole kind of spiel of how long it takes to get licensed, but I'm happy to go through that.
Sure.
But I think it's a lot of schooling. You have to apply and be accepted to an undergraduate program. It's typically about a 4-year program. So you go through that. Some undergrad programs have a co-op um, part of the education where you actually go and work for a firm as well. But once you finish your undergrad, you're right into graduate school for the most part, unless your undergrad is a certified program. And then once your education's all finished, you're really just starting your internship. And internship can last anywhere from like 3 to 7 years, depending on how fast you want to get through it. There's architectural license exams, and then once you finish your internship hours and those exams, you can then apply for your license. So it's definitely challenging. You have to really love it. But I think all of us that are in the industry really appreciate what that experience does for us. It's grueling, but it's really necessary. Through that education process, it hardens your resolve, it makes you form opinions and stand behind them, and develop some of your soft skills too, like communication, presentation, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I've worked with a number of architects over the year, and a lot of young ones that have just come out of their masters, and you just kind of witness their process and how many hours they have to collect and all the different aspects of the business. It's a good thing really because you wouldn't want somebody without that experience designing a large building, just well for obvious reasons. But yeah, it is a grueling journey, and you do have to be dedicated to it. So
It's a necessary evil, but I think for me personally, like some of the challenges too, is I went to school in Michigan. I'm born and raised in the Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario area. I went to school over in Michigan as a dual citizen, and my intention was to keep working down in the U.S. when I graduated. Unfortunately, I graduated my undergrad program in 2007, and the economy was just kind of falling off the ledge at that point. So
oh yeah.
I learned pretty fast how fragile our industry can be and how tied to the economy it can be. So I ended up moving back to the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and I never left.
Well, it's a nice spot. I've always enjoyed my youngest brother went to Waterloo for a few years, so it was a nice. I enjoyed visiting him whenever he was there.
It, it's definitely grown up around me. It's become people like to describe it as a small town that has big city amenities.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. So maybe you can share a little bit about WalterFedy and what you do, or what I guess WalterFedy does. There might be people who listen to this who may not know a bit of backstory on the firm and maybe some of the more special or interesting projects that you would have worked on.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So at WalterFedy, I think we've been around. Don't quote me on the date, but I think it's about 70 years. It's been here for a long time. It started off as a mechanical electrical firm, ended up merging with an architectural group back in the 70s, I believe, and it sort of evolved over time to a fully integrated firm. So as WalterFedy, we offer architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, civil, all the engineering disciplines. We also have an energy and carbon solutions group, a facilities management group, and we have a sister company called AEC that does construction management. So we're really kind of positioning ourselves to be a one-stop shop for any kind of client to come here with, as I mentioned before, we have a wide range of different project types that we can deliver.
That's awesome. I know in the project meetings there's a few of your team that varying disciplines as well. Like we've got structural, interior design, civil, everybody on the call, and they're all from WalterFedy. So it's really great that there's so many disciplines under one roof. Um, would you say that that would be what gives WalterFedy your distinct character compared to other firms, or is there another kind of characteristic or component to that?
I think that, but I think we feel very strongly about our core values, and that's quality, client focus, integrity, environmental sustainability, and community building. I think we're pretty active on all those fronts, especially when it comes to sustainability. I think that's been always something that's been important to us, but I'd say more so in the last 5 years.
Would any of those kind of goals or statements, or I guess mission statements, would that have been an influence in how WalterFedy has become a Waterloo area top employer recently? or is there more to it than that? Or is it a culture, or maybe you could expand on that, or?
Sure, yeah. So I think we've been a Waterloo region area top employer for a couple of years now, and I think what that group looks at is things that we offer in the eyes of the employee. So things like engagement, benefits, turnover rates, how active we are in the community, and sustainability too. So that's a big piece of it. I think it really aligns well with those core values I mentioned. We have a number of committees that keep some of our staff engaged in different aspects of the business as well.
That's awesome.
I think the other kind of cornerstone too is training and continuous improvement. So training is a big part of what we offer employees. And when we had the opportunity to learn more about Passive House, it was kind of a no-brainer for us.
That's a good transition. Because my next question for you is how did you come to cross paths with Passive House? As we kind of get into more of that segment of our chat.
For me, Passive House, I took a Passive House course in undergrad, kind of in the early 2000s when I was in school in Michigan. And our professor took us on a couple of tours of some passive houses that were literally houses. These were small buildings that were built off grid. But for me, that early stage of my education career, it was really impactful. It made me kind of rethink what a building could be and how it could be really harmonious with its surroundings. Some of these houses had a solar chimney and had windows that were oriented in the right direction to take advantage of the solar cycle. So for me, it was really kind of life changing of how my thinking of buildings could be.
Well, that's awesome. So maybe dwelling a little bit on the first question, but how did your firm come to adopt Passive House? Was it just a requirement or a need from a project, or was it more of like a natural evolution kind of spurring from your sustainability work and efforts?
Well, I'm paraphrasing, but I think one of my colleagues in our energy and carbon solutions group reached out to Peel Passive House, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, to collaborate on a pursuit project. So he had nothing but good things to say, and when this one of our projects developed into being interested in Passive House, it was recommended we reach out to Peel, and we did that, and here we are today.
That's awesome. So we're going to move on to the next little bit here. So I guess what support or involvement have you gotten from your colleagues at WalterFedy? So like when we're looking for training and that sort of stuff. And is there any other people with a similar kind of appetite or interest in the process or interest in the building standard?
Yeah, so I think when you're working on the project that we are developing with Peel Passive House currently, the decision was made early on to go with Passive House, and that really developed out of our relationship with Sustainable Waterloo Region. We worked with them pretty closely, and they advised us to look into Passive House and its alignment with this client's pro forma. For us, when we discussed that as a project type, it was really a no-brainer. Passive House was always something that we've been interested in as a firm, and for us to take advantage of an opportunity to work on a building like this and to incorporate training, it was really a no-brainer. We just wanted to get in there and learn. And when we asked our project team who would be interested, all their hands went up. And we even had more people too. So we had, as you know, there was many people in the training sessions that were not even attached to this project. They just wanted to learn more about it. And we actually had to turn some people away. We had too many people that wanted to come. So there's no shortage of passion and interest in this type of sustainability.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I like the time with the Sustainable Waterloo was the organization.
Sustainable Waterloo Region, yeah.
Sustainable Waterloo Region, yeah. How kind of how I love how that they're kind of bringing it to the table. Say, for a project team, have you considered it? Coming from a municipality or like a aligned organization. And it speaks to the importance of advocacy. Some of us in the passive space have been advocating with such organizations early on for passive, and you don't really see much happening in the immediately, but kind of in the background. I think it starts to shape people's minds, and then it comes almost full circle to where they're talking about introducing it or looking at having teams or projects actually explore it.
Yeah, so WalterFedy is very connected with SWR. Like we have certain initiatives that or targets, I should say, that we're trying to meet. We've done a 5-year commitment to reducing our carbon footprint. So we work with them very regularly and test a lot of things in our current buildings, just to conform with that. So we know that organization very well, and we're a member organization. But the person over there, Tova Davidson, knows one of our clients who we were working on this project with, and said, why are you guys not doing passive house on this project? And that really started the whole conversation of going down this road. And to us, it was really such a natural alignment with this type of work. So the project is long-term affordable housing, and it really aligns well with that type of model, where you spend some dollars at the initial outset of the project, and it saves money over the course of the building's lifespan.
Okay, so moving right along, what would be the most prominent achievement from WalterFedy in the sustainability space?
Well, I think there's a lot here. So we've been, like I said, in the last number of years, we've been really pushing into sustainability. Fortunately, we've had some great opportunities to work with some really excellent forward-thinking clients. We have 5 projects underway currently that are net zero. We have a net zero integrated team approach. So we've got 5 buildings that are geared towards net zero. We have 4 projects that are mass timber projects, and we just completed one in 2001. We're also doing another project that is considering going to passive house as well. So we really want to be on the kind of leading edge of what sustainability means to our community.
That's really great to hear. Usually, like a lot of firms, I find come to passive house as a project requirement, but to have that wealth of experience and that kind of initiative behind passive house in the net zero industry or in space is really, really keen as well. It's good to hear. And how has, I guess, bleeding off of that, how has your firm's experience in the sustainability building practice supported your delivering of a passive house project? Has it created a bit of a foundational awareness for building sustainability within the team?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think we have a strong culture of sustainability. So our desire to innovate and be on the leading edge of sustainability, this opportunity to work with Passive House has really just begun. This is the first project for us in Passive House, the first project for me personally, and I think we're really excited to see where this can go.
So part of engaging with Passive House for the Community Hub on Charles project, if we're allowed to bring up the name, WalterFedy decided to engage us, Peel Passive House, for private training for the project team. Maybe you could shed some light on why you opted for the training aspect of or Passive House training?
Yeah, so for us, when we went down this path of Passive House, when the training was part of the conversation, like I mentioned before, it was kind of a no-brainer. Our team was very passionate and wanted to learn more. And for us, it wouldn't make sense just to jump in and do one project and leave. I think me personally, I want to be very involved in the process, learn about how Passive House is actually put together, how the modeling works, how these buildings are assessed when they're constructed. I wanted to learn more of the entire process as a whole. So training was a big part of that. I think there was 8 of us in that training, and I think everyone's indicated that they want to pursue certification, likely later on this year, and hopefully things get less crazy in the marketplace. But if we get some extra time, that's definitely something we want to pursue.
That's good. So I guess, what benefits would you have seen since you've completed the training? Has it prepared you for what you're seeing on the project that we're working on together? Has it created a bit more of an awareness of what we need to kind of accomplish holistically as a team? Maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Sure. I think the benefits we see is that it's kind of a renewed awareness and appreciation for how buildings can be designed better. Oftentimes in the market, we're working with clients we've got a budget. They have to meet certain criteria for their buildings, whether they're an owner operator or a developer trying to flip the building. They have a budget to work with. So part of it is really giving us the opportunity to build buildings how we think they should be. Adding this amount of insulation in a passive house building and making it airtight are things that kind of going the extra mile that you don't normally see on a traditional building. So I think for us, it's um, kind of giving some renewed passion, I guess, for how buildings can be super efficient as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I often find that when people get the bug for Passive House, they wonder why they did anything else. When you go back to building code and you look at the levels of insulation or the levels of air tightness you need to build a code building, it doesn't make any sense after you've seen the light, so to speak.
You got it. I think you told me that day one, and I haven't forgot
Yep.
that.
Um, so how has learning more about Passive House or receiving the training and working on a Passive House project, how has that impacted you on a personal and or professional level?
That's a great question. I think for me, on a personal level, it kind of that awareness and that kind of passion for sustainability, it just kind of piqued that even further. I was really surprised to learn through this whole process how the delta between a traditional building and a passive house building in terms of cost actually isn't as much as I was thinking originally. I think the gap that's there is closer than most might think. And I think it gives me some ammunition, I guess, in the future to educate some of our clients into making choices that they may want to add extra insulation or even go into a passive house approach to a building. So for me, that's really helped kind of achieve that. And even if a building is not going to be passive house standard, it at least gives us some understanding of more education about reducing thermal bridges and creating fully enclosed spaces and air tightness in the building. So from a professional level, I think it's really helped my understanding of how we detail buildings and how we can improve our processes.
Oh, that's great. Is there anything that's surprising or surprised you from your learning about the passive house industry? Maybe something that kind of stuck out and was a bit of a wow moment or something.
Yeah, two things. Like one is the cost. Like I just mentioned. I was surprised to see the difference in the cost between traditional building and passive house, and I think the delta is a good argument, especially for the project we're working on together. With a supportive housing model, they typically get more funding up front, but it's kind of hard to get that sustained funding all through the lifespan of a building. So if we're an organization that's doing something like that and holding a building for its lifespan, if they can find that initial money to just make up that little bit of difference to go from a traditional building to passive house standard, that to me is hugely beneficial from a long-term perspective. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think the other thing it offers too is just the thermal comfort as well. I think that's what I didn't really think about coming into the passive house model. Yeah, it's energy efficient, but I didn't even really think about how much better occupants can feel in the space.
Yeah, and that's a huge impact that a lot of people really don't kind of understand when you're talking about building better or building high performance buildings like passive houses. And I also find just kind of coming back to your little segue about how these organizations, when you're looking at affordable housing or supportive housing, and getting the capital money up front to make these improvements is it can be done and often is an encouragement to do because that operational cost later on, those funds are harder to get. But even moving a little bit further from that, the social equity that is offered to the people that live in these buildings when they have better living conditions or more comfortable living conditions or better housing stock, it really improves their quality of life as well. So it's not only a financial, but it's like a mental health and a physical health aspect of it as well that is a bit of a knock-on effect that people don't often see or think about until you kind of get a bit further in. So that's one thing that's really surprised me about the passive house industry is building better housing stock and the impacts on the health and quality of life that people see when they live in these buildings is really kind of like a more holistic kind of situation that you don't often think of because it's like, oh, they're just, affordable housing, it's going to get built however it gets built, but like people have to live in these things too, and often they're lower income or they have issues that it's harder for them to find quality housing. So it's a really great initiative when these supportive housing organizations start looking at passive house as an option.
Yeah, and for me, like I've heard Bjarke Ingels of Big Architecture. I've heard him talk a few times about this concept of hedonistic sustainability, and that's the kind of philosophy that sustainability can actually be more enjoyable and comfortable and livable. For me, when you think about sustainable building, you're thinking about, okay, I got to restrict all the window sizes, and you're creating these massively thick walls. I think a lot of people can think that would restrict your design ability and restrict how you can design a building to make it beautiful. I think I'm really interested personally in how we can use this technology, use a passive house concept, but still make great architecture.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the things that I often hear from architects is when you get into these passive house buildings is the history and the project examples that you would have to look at. Typical houses or buildings historically done to passive house are often, kind of simple, boxy, maybe limited in their aesthetics, but there is that whole connection and tie-in that you have to make it nice to look at. You have to do aesthetics. It has to be pleasing, but it also has to perform well. And having those two things mixed together is really, really fundamental to the process of architecture, but also to the process of like our built environment and people enjoying the building that you're going to put them in, so that it's not just a box with tiny little windows that looks horrible because an energy modeler designed it and not an architect or somebody with that kind of prowess or design acumen. So yeah, I hear what you're saying a little bit with that.
Now I'll jump in as well. Picking up on the point about ongoing cost and benefits, and really there is a win-win-win. I mean, all around we see with projects. So we have a long-term client in the UK, Exeter City Council, and they've been doing passive house for maybe 13 years or so, and they've found that they've got good long-term running operational experience, and they found that. The tenants they're affordable housing, but they're willing to pay a bit more, 10-15% more, because they're in a passive house. They have lower turnover, lower rent arrears. So actually, it's financially more favorable for them to actually build a passive house than a conventional building.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more models like that where passive house just seems to knit in well that whole concept. You think about long-term scale of the building, it's really a no-brainer to go passive house. You're saving all that cost and creating a better indoor environment for X number of years.
Yeah, no, it's a really great business model. Like I don't understand why people are so adverse to it sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, they just need to cross the bridge and see the light, I guess, or drink the Kool-Aid, whichever.
I think it's awareness and education. I think you're
Yeah.
just getting the word out. I think you guys have done a great job of advertising passive house. I think the more and more we talk about it, engage with builders and organizations that do architecture and construction, the more and more we can improve our landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice, or would you have any advice for any other firms getting into passive house or looking to start their first passive house project or dabbling a little bit here and there?
Yeah, I think my advice for a firm that's thinking about doing passive house is be prepared to fully rethink how you would put together details. I think we've been working in the industry through your career. You learn different techniques and acceptable details that are, I'll say, traditional or standard. That's kind of what's been expected in our industry. With passive house, it really kind of pushes you that extra mile to rethink how we cover our details in insulation, how we make the building airtight, from mechanical, electrical design, just creating a centralized system that works with the building very well. I think my advice too would be to, if it's your first building or you're just getting into passive house, engage an organization like Peel Passive House with your mechanical, electrical teams, especially as early as you can in the process. It's not really scary or overwhelming to get into passive house, but it's just the approach and the whole design aspect of the building is just different.
And I'm glad you picked up on education of other team members, not just the architects, but mechanical in particular. We find that when uh, um, a broader part of the team. I mean, even sometimes a client, if there's a construction manager involved, like getting them through training really helps. Everyone starts speaking the same language, has the fundamentals of passive house and requirements, and it becomes just a much smoother process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything new and exciting in the sustainability sector? You said you've got another passive house project possibly in the pipeline. Maybe you could share a bit of that.
Yeah, from a design side, WalterFedy has got some really interesting projects in kind of the sustainability front that we're very interested in, very passionate about. We're very excited to be working on, net zero, mass timber, and then more passive house. I think as an organization, WalterFedy is really committed to sustainability. So this concept of beyond zero carbon is we kind of talk about it on the WalterFedy website, but I think the current goal for us is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60%, and that's over the 2017 baseline. So reducing that to 2030. We're currently tracking our carbon footprint that we generate through electricity, water, natural gas usage, the amount of garbage that we generate, emissions generated by business travel, and employee commuting. So we're really committed to tracking all that data, and that's part of our model and concept with Sustainable Water of the Region. We're tracking those in relationship to our past usage.
And do you do any offsets or credits or something to help offset any of your carbon consumption, especially when you're talking about employee travel? I know airfare is quite substantial when it comes to that. So is it a track initiative or is it a track and credit initiative?
I think it's a bit of both. So tracking is a big part of it, just to kind of give us a baseline understanding of where we are. So as we do things like lighting upgrades, how much of an impact we're making. But from this point forward, like WalterFedy is very committed to purchasing enough credits, like carbon offset credits, annually. And then I think the plan is to do an additional 10% to bring us to beyond zero carbon.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, so I think like COVID's really changed the way we've approached things like commuting and hybrid working models. I think there's really some interesting things happening in the workplace. We're implementing electric vehicle charging as well, leveraging electronic communications just to reduce business travel as well.
Yeah, I found COVID really kind of helps people realize that you don't need to be in person. You can do a webcam video chat and it's almost, well, I mean, not almost the same, but it's a very similar approach. You don't need to see everybody all the time. So is really interesting when we were all in lockdown, the carbon emissions that they were tracking with satellites was just dropping astronomically. People weren't going anywhere in their cars, their planes, like nothing was moving, and it was so impressive to see. It was like, oh, that's not going to be sustainable, but it was nice to see for a little bit there when we were all in lockdown.
Yeah, for a while there, it looked like we hit our 5-year goal in the course of a
Oh, I
month.
know.
So we were like,
Yeah,
oh, great. So I guess we can just stop tracking this. We've accomplished our
just
goal. Then
forget about it. It's fine.
Hmm.
All right. So I guess just to kind of get things wrapped up a little bit here, if you had a magic wand and can solve a problem, what would it be?
that's a great question. I think cost and awareness are two things that I'd love to change. So I think from an awareness perspective, just educating clients and people we work with, like what they can do with buildings, how much better they can be with just a little bit of more effort, different way of doing things, and then the cost as well. Just different ways of approaching a similar problem. So as things like mass timber become more and more popular, the economy of scale is going to drive the price down. I think that's two things I would change. I think maybe I'll just add one more piece. I think from an awareness piece, I think that the general public doesn't necessarily understand the implications of our built environment. I think a lot of the focus has been on personal vehicles as a greenhouse gas emitter. But buildings contribute to something like 50% of the global CO2 emissions. So if we can just take some steps to reduce that number, that would be the perfect world. I think try to reduce that number as much as we can with things like passive house, embodied carbon methods like mass timber. Those are all methodologies that can help reduce that impact on our world.
Absolutely, yeah. I find there's a lot of people who don't realize how much energy their house consumes and how much energy or how much less energy it could consume if it were built right. And that's always a bit of an eye-opener, especially when we go through like our training courses. And I know that you sat this as well. I think one of the very first days or sessions is we really highlight, what we ask the question of like, where do you think your energy is going in your house? And then actually give them the data of where it's actually going. And when people realize that, oh, I'm paying way more than heating than I could, it's really a bit of an eye-opener of the benefits of building, good housing stock. And it all comes down to that awareness and that education. So those are really great fundamentals. Yeah. Um, was there anything that we didn't ask that you would like to answer? Any questions or anything like that?
I thought people always just ask an architect who their favorite building is or who their favorite architect is. I thought it was like a standard question, but I was kind of expecting
Okay,
a curveball
so
like that. But
who who's your favorite architect? Not Frank Gehry, is it?
no, I think I have a couple different favorite buildings I can talk about. Kelly, probably put your earmuffs on for this one, but the Aqua Building in Chicago is one of my favorite buildings. But from what I understand, it is a very poor performing building. There's a lot of the thermal bridging through the balconies, but as
Yeah,
a
we use that as an example in one of our courses for what not to do.
I remember that, yeah. So like, as a sculptural building, it's beautiful just to stand there. I've been to Chicago many times, and just to stand there and look at the building, it's pretty fascinating. I really enjoy it. That's by Studio Gang Architects, I believe. I also really like 57 West by Big Architects in New York City. I think it's one of those projects that really responds to the site it's on in an incredible way. It's a really kind of sculptive building that responds to the kind of the tracking of the sun to bring in a lot of natural light to every single unit. So not necessarily great examples of highly energy efficient design, but ones that are more on the architectural spectrum of what I think are beautiful buildings.
They're very aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah,
I'll agree with you there. Energy, not so much, but aesthetically pleasing for sure.
definitely.
All right, so I guess if somebody wants to learn more about you, Ben, or WalterFedy, how can they best reach you?
They can reach out to me through LinkedIn. That's probably the best way if you don't know who I am. If you just search Ben Gregory, WalterFedy, I'm sure it'll come up. That's probably the best way to track me down if you don't have my email address.
Awesome. So this brings an end to our time together, and I just wanted to thank you, Ben, for taking time out of your busy day. I know we're all a bit slammed these days, so it was great that you were able to join us and to share your journey with Passive House with us and our listeners. Yeah, thanks for your time. We really appreciate getting to know your process a little bit more and your story into architecture a bit more. It's really great.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.